Before we step into the ancient kitchens, the clay ovens, the olive groves, and the quiet evening courtyards, one important word. This video is for educational and documentary purposes only. It is not medical advice. No single food can replace professional care, medication, or a balanced lifestyle. If you have a medical condition, allergies, dietary restrictions, or concerns about fermented foods, raw honey, dairy, gluten, or seafood, always speak with a qualified health professional. The people of the ancient world did not have modern nutrition science. They did not know the names of polyphenols, probiotics, omega-3 fatty acids, resistant starch, magnesium, or soluble fiber. But they watched. They watched which meals carried a worker through a long day. They watched which foods stored well in heat. They watched what settled the stomach after travel. They watched what could be shared at a table when there was very little to spare. Their science was not written in laboratories. It was written in habit, in harvest, in repetition, in the memory of families who survived because they learned what food could do. And now, modern science is beginning to give language to some of what ancient people may have known by experience. Number 12. Lentil stew with olive oil, the evening bowl of strength. As the sun lowered over the hills of ancient Canaan, the evening meal often began with a pot. Not a polished metal pot, not a modern saucepan, but a clay vessel darkened by years of fire, resting near warm coals, holding something thick, simple, and fragrant. Lentils. In the biblical world, lentils were not a side dish. They were survival food. They were field food. They were the kind of food that could feed a family when meat was rare, when the harvest had to stretch, and when the day had taken more strength than expected. One of the most famous food moments in Genesis is the story of Esau coming in from the field exhausted, asking Jacob for red stew. The story is usually remembered as a lesson about impatience and desire. But beneath the moral drama is something very human. A man comes home from hard labor. His body is depleted, and what he craves is not cake, not wine, not luxury. He craves lentils. Modern nutrition helps us understand why. Lentils contain plant-based protein, slow-digesting carbohydrates, iron, folates, magnesium, potassium, and fiber. They do not rush through the body like refined starch. They release energy slowly. They help create a feeling of fullness that can last for hours. And when lentils are soaked before cooking, as many traditional cultures have done for generations, some of the compounds that interfere with mineral absorption may be reduced. The ancient cook did not call this bioavailability. She simply knew that soaked lentils cooked better, felt better, and nourished more deeply. Add olive oil at the end, while the stew is warm but not violently boiling, and the meal changes again. The oil brings richness. The herbs open. The texture softens. The food becomes not only fuel, but comfort. A bowl of lentil stew at night would have given the ancient body what the evening often asks for: warmth, steadiness, minerals, and enough substance to rest without heaviness. It was not glamorous food. But ancient wisdom often hides inside the foods that never needed to advertise themselves. And the next evening, food takes us from the clay pot to the edge of the pasture, where milk was not just a drink, it was a living food. Number 11. Warm fermented goat milk, the living drink of the ancient household. In a warm climate, milk does not stay fresh for long. The ancient world knew this. And instead of fighting nature with refrigeration they did not have, they learned to work with it. Milk was allowed to sour, thicken, ferment, and transform. In the tents, villages, and stone houses of the ancient Near East, goat and sheep milk were often more practical than cow's milk. Goats could survive in rough land. They could graze on hillsides. They gave milk where larger animals could not always thrive. And when that milk fermented naturally, it became something closer to yogurt, Laban, or labneh, tangy, alive, and easier for many people to tolerate than fresh milk. The Bible often speaks of milk as a sign of abundance. The phrase, "a land flowing with milk and honey," is not just poetic. It is agricultural. It describes a place where animals could graze, where flowers could feed bees, where people could live close enough to the land to be nourished by it. Modern science has become deeply interested in fermented foods because of their relationship with the gut microbiome. Fermented dairy can contain beneficial bacteria, including lactic acid bacteria, depending on how it is prepared. These bacteria may support digestive balance, and help contribute to microbial diversity in the gut. But the ancient evening table did not need those words. A small bowl of warm fermented goat milk, perhaps with herbs, perhaps with a little bread, would have been a quiet food at the end of the day. Not cold, not sweetened into dessert, not packaged and flavored, just warm, sour, simple, and alive. There is something deeply different between eating a food that has been preserved by life and eating a food preserved only by industry. Fermentation was one of the ancient world's great forms of patience. It asked people to wait, to trust time, to allow invisible life to change the food before it changed the body. For some people today, fermented dairy is not appropriate, especially for those with dairy intolerance, immune concerns, or dietary restrictions. But as a piece of food history, it tells us something important. The ancient table was not sterile, it was microbial, it was seasonal, it was alive. And when we reach number 10, we find another food that ancient people valued not only for nourishment, but for what it represented: peace after labor. Number 10. Olives, herbs, and barley bread. The supper of the olive grove. Imagine an evening in the hill country. The air cools. The insects begin their song. A family sits near the doorway as the last light touches the olive trees. There is no complicated supper on the table. Only bread, olives, herbs, and oil. To the modern eye, it may look too simple. But to the ancient world, it was abundance. The olive tree was one of the great pillars of Mediterranean life. Its fruit could be cured. Its oil could be pressed. Its wood could burn. Its groves could outlive generations. Olive oil appears again and again in ancient life. In cooking, in lamps, in anointing, in offerings, in healing traditions, and in daily meals. Modern science has spent decades studying extra virgin olive oil because it contains monounsaturated fats and plant compounds such as polyphenols. Some of these compounds have been associated with heart-conscious dietary patterns, especially in traditional Mediterranean-style eating. But the ancient person did not separate the oil from the tree from the land, or the meal from the day. Olives with barley bread made sense. The bread gave structure. The olives gave salt, fat, and flavor. The herbs gave brightness. The oil tied it all together. Barley, one of the oldest grains in the biblical world, contains soluble fiber, including beta-glucan. This type of fiber has been studied for its ability to support healthy cholesterol levels as part of an overall balanced diet, and may help slow the absorption of carbohydrates. At the evening meal, that matters. A food that digests more slowly may help the body avoid the sharp rise and fall that comes from refined starches. It may create steadier satisfaction, the kind that allows the night to feel complete. This was not a diet meal. It was a practical supper. A piece of coarse bread dipped into oil, a few olives, a handful of herbs, a quiet body after a long day. Sometimes the foods that look the poorest on the table are the richest in memory. But number 9 takes us into a fruit so symbolic that ancient people carved it into sacred spaces, and modern science is still studying what it becomes inside the body. Number 9. Pomegranate with thick yogurt, the fruit of abundance. The pomegranate is not an easy fruit. It does not offer itself quickly. You must open it, break it, pull back the pale membranes, free the red seeds one by one. Perhaps this is why ancient people respected it. In the Hebrew Bible, pomegranates appear as symbols of beauty, abundance, and sacred design. They are described on priestly garments and temple imagery. They were not treated like ordinary fruit. They carried meaning. A pomegranate looks like a small world filled with rubies. At an ancient evening table, the seeds may have been scattered over thick fermented milk, pressed into juice, or eaten slowly by hand as the day cooled. Modern science is interested in pomegranates because they contain polyphenols, including compounds that gut bacteria can transform into other substances known as urolithins. These are being studied for their relationship with inflammation, cellular function, and metabolic health, though the research is still developing. That detail is important. Some of the most interesting things in pomegranate are not simply inside the fruit. They depend on what happens when the fruit meets the microbiome. In other words, the body participates. The fruit gives one part. The bacteria give another. The person becomes the place where the ancient food is completed. This may be one reason why pairing pomegranate with fermented dairy is so fascinating. The yogurt brings living cultures. The pomegranate brings fiber and polyphenols. Together they form a kind of ancient conversation between fruit and fermentation. Not medicine, not magic. A food relationship. A spoonful of thick yogurt with pomegranate seeds would be tart, creamy, bright, and slow. It would make the eater pay attention, and perhaps that was part of its wisdom. The ancient evening meal was not designed to be swallowed in a hurry. Some foods asked for time. Some foods made the hand move slower. The pomegranate is one of them, and the next food, humble as it seems, may be one of the most overlooked mineral-rich foods of the ancient world. Number 8. Sesame paste with honey. The quiet strength of the seed. Before sugar became cheap, sweetness was rare. And before calcium came in fortified drinks and supplements, ancient people found minerals in seeds, leaves, bones, small fish, dairy, legumes, and grains. Sesame was one of those quiet treasures. Tiny, dry, easy to store, easy to carry, full of oil. Across the ancient Near East and Mediterranean world, sesame was pressed, ground, traded, and eaten. When ground into paste, it became something very close to what we know today as tahini. At night, mixed with a little honey and spread over bread, sesame paste would have been simple, dense, and deeply satisfying. Modern nutrition gives us a clearer picture of why. Sesame seeds contain healthy fats, plant protein, calcium, magnesium, zinc, and lignans such as sesamin and sesamolin. These compounds have been studied for antioxidant activity and their role in supporting overall metabolic health as part of a balanced diet. But the ancient value of sesame was also practical. It stored well, it traveled well, it gave energy without needing fresh harvest. It could turn a small piece of bread into a meal. Honey added sweetness, but in the ancient world, honey was more than flavor. It was one of the rare, concentrated sweet foods available. Raw honey also contains enzymes and plant compounds, though it should never be given to infants under 1 year old, and it is not appropriate for everyone. For an ancient worker, a thin layer of sesame paste and honey on bread at the end of the day may have felt like comfort. Not dessert as we understand it now, something quieter. A food that said, the work is finished. The fire is low. The body can stop. What makes this combination interesting is not that it is exotic. It is that it is balanced. Fat from the sesame. Carbohydrate from the bread and honey. Minerals from the seed. Flavor from the earth and the hive. The ancient world often built nutrition by combining ordinary things. And number 7 shows this even more clearly, because sometimes the food that looks like a poor person's mash is actually a lesson in gut science. Number 7. Chickpea mash with garlic and olive oil, the ancient food that fed the gut. Long before hummus became a supermarket container with a plastic lid, chickpeas were soaked, cooked, crushed, and mixed by hand. A stone bowl, a wooden pestle, a little oil, a little salt, garlic crushed until sharp, maybe lemon or vinegar where available, maybe herbs from the courtyard. The result was not fancy, but it was powerful food. Chickpeas were part of the ancient food world because they were reliable. They could be dried and stored. They could feed workers, travelers, and households. They could stretch a meal when meat was scarce. Modern science helps us appreciate something ancient people could only feel. Chickpeas are not just food for us. They are food for the bacteria that live within us. They contain fiber and resistant starch, some of which passes through the small intestine and reaches the colon, where gut bacteria can ferment it into short-chain fatty acids such as butyrate. Butyrate is important because it helps nourish the cells lining the colon and is being studied for its role in gut barrier function and inflammation. The ancient person did not know the word butyrate, but he knew that a bowl of chickpeas sat differently in the body than a piece of sweet cake. He knew it stayed with him. He knew it gave strength without vanishing quickly. Garlic added another layer. When garlic is crushed, compounds inside it interact and form allicin, which has been studied for antimicrobial and cardiovascular supportive properties. But garlic is strong. It is not for everyone, and some people with digestive sensitivity may need to use it carefully. The olive oil made the mash smooth, the herbs made it fragrant, the bread made it complete. This kind of food is easy to underestimate because it is not dramatic. No king, no miracle, no feast, just soaked legumes, crushed garlic, and oil. But sometimes the ancient world's deepest wisdom was not in its rare foods. It was in the foods people could eat again and again without needing wealth. A good evening food is not always the richest food. Often, it is the food that knows how to stay. And number 6 takes us to the shoreline, where the evening meal was shaped by nets, fire, and water. Number 6. Grilled fish with bitter herbs. The food of the shore near the Sea of Galilee, evening would have had its own sound. Water moving softly against boats. Nets being pulled in. Voices carrying across the shore. A charcoal fire beginning to glow. Fish was one of the most important foods in the world of the Bible. It was eaten fresh near the water, dried or salted for storage, and traded into towns and villages. For fishermen, fish was not special occasion food, it was ordinary. But ordinary does not mean insignificant. Small fish can provide high-quality protein, minerals, and, depending on the species, omega-3 fatty acids such as EPA and DHA. These fats are important for the structure and function of the brain and have been studied extensively for their role in heart and inflammatory health patterns. But, again, the ancient world did not eat fish because of omega-3 labels. They ate what the water gave. At night, fish grilled over coals with bitter herbs would have been light but nourishing. The herbs mattered. Bitter greens and herbs appear in ancient meals, including Passover tradition, where they carried symbolic meaning. But bitterness also has a physical quality. Bitter foods can stimulate the senses and may support digestive readiness by encouraging saliva and digestive secretions. The ancient table did not fear bitterness. Modern food often hides it under sugar, salt, and artificial flavor. But ancient people knew bitter foods had a place. They woke up the mouth. They made fat feel cleaner. They reminded the eater that not all nourishment is sweet. A piece of grilled fish, a handful of bitter herbs, a little oil, a little bread. That meal would not overwhelm the evening body. It would give protein after labor. It would give minerals after sweat. It would give warmth without heaviness. And the image stays with us. A darkening shore, a small fire, fish turned by hand, herbs torn at the table. The ancient evening meal was often less about abundance and more about proportion. Enough to restore. Not so much that rest became difficult. And number 5 brings us to a food the Israelites remembered from Egypt, a cooling food of water, minerals, and longing. Number 5. Cucumbers, leeks, and garlic, the cooling foods of memory. In the book of Numbers, when the Israelites are in the wilderness, they remember the foods of Egypt: fish, cucumbers, melons, leeks, onions, garlic. It is a strange and human moment. They are not just remembering taste. They are remembering a whole world. The wet fields of Egypt, the irrigated gardens, the foods that cooled the body under a hot sun. Cucumbers and melons are water-rich foods. Leeks, onions, and garlic belong to the allium family, plants that have been valued across traditional diets for flavor and potential health-supportive compounds. Modern science studies allium vegetables because they contain sulfur-containing compounds and prebiotic fibers that may support beneficial gut bacteria. They are also deeply flavorful, which means they can make simple meals satisfying without needing heavy sauces or excessive salt. At an ancient evening table, cucumbers with herbs, onions, and a little fermented dairy would have been refreshing after heat. Not every ancient meal was warm and heavy. Some meals were cooling, some were watery, some were designed by climate. This is one of the biggest lessons modern people often miss. Ancient food was not only about ingredients, it was about place. A desert meal was different from a fishing village meal. A harvest meal was different from a winter meal. A food eaten at noon was not always the food eaten after sunset. Cucumber, leeks, and garlic remind us that the ancient world ate with the weather. When the body was hot, food could cool. When the body was tired, food could restore. When the body was empty, food could ground. This was not a diet plan. It was attention. And the next food may surprise you, because one of the most comforting ancient evening foods began as something hard, dry, and almost lifeless, until water and time transformed. Number 4. Soaked ancient grain porridge, the grain that waited overnight. Before the morning bread, there was often the evening soaking, a bowl of grain covered with water, left near the hearth. Softening in the dark. Ancient people understood something modern people often rush past. Grains change when you give them time. Wheat in the ancient Near East was not the same as modern refined flour. Ancient varieties, such as emmer and einkorn, were used in traditional diets long before industrial milling. And modern breeding changed the way many people encounter wheat today. These grains were often cracked, soaked, fermented, or slow-cooked. At night, a warm grain porridge could be made from what had soaked through the day, or the grain could be prepared in the evening for the next morning. Either way, time was part of the recipe. Soaking grains can help reduce phytic acid, a naturally occurring compound that can bind minerals such as iron, zinc, and magnesium. It can also soften the grain and make cooking easier. Traditional preparation methods may improve digestibility for some people, though individual tolerance varies, especially for those with celiac disease or gluten sensitivity. The ancient cook did not know the chemistry, but she knew that grain treated with patience became different. A warm porridge with olive oil and a pinch of salt would have been plain, but not empty. It would carry fiber, minerals, and slow energy. It would be the kind of food that did not shout. Some foods are exciting because they are rare, others are powerful because they are repeated. This was a repeated food. The food of ordinary nights. The food of households that could not waste. The food that took yesterday's harvest and made tomorrow possible. In the modern world, we often want food to be instant. The ancient world often asked food to become ready slowly. And perhaps that is one of the quiet differences between eating for convenience and eating for restoration. Number 3 now takes us from grain to fruit, to the soft sweetness of figs, one of the most beloved foods in the biblical landscape. Number 3. Figs with walnuts and thick milk, the fruit of patience. A fig tree does not feel rushed. Its leaves are broad, its shade is generous. Its fruit arrives soft, heavy, and easily bruised. In the ancient world, figs were precious because they were both fresh fruit and stored food. They could be eaten ripe from the tree, dried into cakes, packed for travel, or used to sweeten a simple meal. The Bible mentions figs many times, sometimes as a sign of peace and prosperity. Each person sitting under his vine and fig tree, unafraid. That image matters. The fig tree is not just food. It is home. It is shade. It is settled life. At an evening table, figs with nuts and thick milk or yogurt would have been a deeply satisfying combination. Figs provide fiber, including soluble fibers such as pectin, along with minerals like potassium, calcium, and magnesium. Walnuts provide plant-based fats, including alpha-linolenic acid, a plant omega-3 fatty acid, as well as polyphenols. Fermented milk adds protein and, depending on preparation, live cultures. Together, the meal is sweet, fatty, creamy, and slow. This matters because sweetness alone can vanish quickly in the body. But sweetness combined with fat, protein, and fiber behaves differently. It becomes more grounded, more complete. Ancient people often built balance without ever naming it. Fruit with nuts, bread with oil, legumes with herbs, milk with dates, fish with bitter greens. They were not isolating nutrients. They were pairing foods. A fig eaten alone is beautiful. A fig eaten with walnuts and thick yogurt becomes an evening meal. And there is a lesson in that. Sometimes wisdom is not in the food itself, but in the combination. The body rarely asks for one isolated thing. It asks for relationships between fiber and bacteria, between fat and vitamins, between protein and repair, between sweetness and time. And number 2 takes us to one of the oldest comfort foods in the ancient world: dates, almonds, and warm water. Number 2. Dates, almonds, and warm water, the traveler's quiet supper. Not every evening meal happened at a table. Some happened beside a road, some beside a tent, some under stars, some after a long walk when there was no oven, no pot, and no village nearby. For travelers, shepherds, traders, and messengers, the ideal food had to be portable, stable, dense, and reliable. Dates and almonds were exactly that. Dates are naturally sweet, rich in carbohydrates, and contain fiber, potassium, magnesium, and various plant compounds. Almonds bring fat, protein, vitamin E, magnesium, and more fiber. Together, they form a small meal that travels well. The dates give quick energy. The almonds slowly experience down. The warm water softens the stomach into evening. This combination may seem almost too simple to take seriously, but that is part of its genius. The ancient traveler could carry it. The shepherd could eat it without fire. The merchant could share it. The elder could chew it slowly. Modern research has looked closely at almonds and found that their structure affects how much fat is actually absorbed during digestion. The food matrix matters. In other words, the body does not always receive food the way a nutrition label mathematically predicts. Ancient people did not count the calories in almonds. They noticed something more practical. Almonds were filling without being heavy. Dates restored without needing cooking. Warm water helped the body receive the meal gently. There is a kindness in this kind of food. No excess, no rush, no performance. Just a few dates, a small handful of almonds, and a cup of warm water in the dark. And now we come to number 1. Not the rarest food, not the most expensive, not the most dramatic. The final ancient evening food is the one that brings the entire pattern together. Grain, oil, herbs, warmth, simplicity, and a body allowed to slow down. Number 1. Barley soup with olive oil and herbs. The humble meal that explains the ancient table at the center of the ancient evening table was not a superfood. It was a bowl. A warm bowl of barley soup, softened with water, finished with olive oil, seasoned with herbs, and shared while the day disappeared. This may be the most important food on the list because it is the least impressive. No shining fruit, no rare spice, no expensive meat, no feast, just barley. And yet barley carried civilizations. It fed farmers, soldiers, laborers, widows, prophets, and children. It grew in difficult conditions. It stored well. It could become bread, porridge, soup, or drink. It belonged to the ordinary person. In the Bible, barley often appears as the grain of common life. It is connected with harvest, provision, and simple nourishment. Modern science gives us a reason to respect it again. Barley contains beta-glucan, a soluble fiber that forms a gel-like texture in the digestive tract. This fiber has been studied for its ability to support healthy cholesterol levels and help moderate post-meal blood sugar response as part of a balanced diet. But in soup form, barley becomes especially interesting. It is hydrated, softened, warm, slow. The body does not have to fight it. Add olive oil, and the soup becomes more satisfying. Add herbs, and it becomes fragrant. Add lentils or vegetables, and it becomes stronger. But even in its simplest form, barley soup represents the ancient principle better than almost anything else. The evening meal should not shock the body. It should gather it. After heat, labor, walking, lifting, fishing, harvesting, speaking, worrying, and surviving, the body needs to be brought down gently. A warm bowl does that in a way a packaged snack cannot. It asks you to sit, to hold something warm, to eat slowly, to stop being a machine. And maybe this is the deeper wisdom modern science can only partly measure. The value of ancient food was not only in the compounds, not only in the beta-glucan, not only in the polyphenols, not only in the probiotics, not only in the minerals. It was in the rhythm. Food was tied to light, to labor, to family, to fire, to silence, to the land. The ancient world did not eat perfectly. It was not romantic. Life was hard, food could be scarce, and survival was never guaranteed. But because food mattered so much, people paid attention to it. They noticed what sustained them. They preserved what worked. They passed it down. And when modern science looks back at these foods, barley, lentils, olives, figs, fermented milk, fish, sesame, herbs, dates, almonds, pomegranates, it does not find empty superstition. It often finds fiber, fermentation, healthy fats, minerals, plant compounds, microbial life, slow energy, and combinations that make biological sense. The ancient table was not built by accident. It was built by hunger, observation, memory, and so tonight, as the modern world glows blue with screens and hums with machines, Maybe the ancient evening meal has something quiet to teach us, not that we need to live exactly as they lived. Not that any one food can solve everything, but that the body may still recognize what is warm, slow, simple, and real. The people of the ancient world did not know the names of the compounds inside their food, but they knew the feeling of being nourished. They knew the difference between food that merely filled the stomach and food that carried a person into the next day. Maybe wisdom does not always arrive as something new. Sometimes it returns as a bowl of soup, a piece of bread, a few olives, a fig split open by hand, a cup of warm milk, a meal eaten slowly as the light fades. And maybe the first step is not to change everything. Maybe it is simply to choose one evening meal that is a little less processed, a little more patient, and a little closer to the earth than the one before it. Because sometimes the oldest foods are not behind us. They are waiting quietly for us to remember them. If this kind of ancient science and quiet history speaks to you, you may want to subscribe for more slow, thoughtful journeys like this. And tonight, before you sleep, ask yourself one simple question. What would change if your evening meal was not just the end of your day, but the beginning of your restoration?